they were like prized possessions, and if you lost your dart, it was almost like the end of the world. To these days now, where young players want the best colour, the longest points, the best looking setup. It's not the game I started in 1985. So as good as the technology of darts is, I'm still a firm believer that if you find that right dart, stick with it.
Hello, welcome back to the MODUS Super Series here on Pluto TV, where today we're having a look at the development of technology within the sport of darts. Very much a hot topic in 2025, with many different manufacturers releasing a plethora of plenty of different products. Glenn Dunn, very much a man of the modern day people, is alongside me here in the studio. When you first picked up a dart, going back all those years ago, was it a case of you just going down the pub and picking a setup that was on the board? What were the options available back then?
Yeah, I mean, I started playing darts sort of mid-80s, and you know, the main darts were an Eric Bristow type, Jockey Wilson type, straight barrel. You know, you'd get some grooves in those darts. I mean, the points, when you look at the technology of the points these days, I mean, you know, players would have a set of darts for 20 years with the same points in. There was not a lot of technology there, but that straight barrel and certain grooves. But it was a bit like when you got the catalogue delivered, you know, when we used to get the catalogue of darts, and my choice happened to be an Alan Glazier ton machine dart.
So let's talk about the specifics then of the type of dart that would have been available back in the 80s, back when the likes of Bristow, as you say, were in their pomp. What would have been the key fundamentals to a dart and the technology behind that?
Well, obviously it was tungsten then, because a lot of players when I was playing in the 80s were still using the Jim Pike dart, you know, with the feathers, with sort of various sort of technologies in that one. So the 80s did see the move. You know, we talk about the trailblazer of Eric Bristow. I mean, I think that dart now is so sought after. But tungsten became the dart, the preferred one. You know, people would have the short barrels, long barrels, grooved. You know, we saw players where there was, you know, very Terry Jenkins, like where there was no groove on there. But I think the point I'd get across about the 80s, late 80s, going into the 90s, was the fact that if you had a set of darts, you often kept them for a long time. They were like prized possessions, and if you lost your darts, it was almost like the end of the world.
And was that maybe more a generational thing as well? Because you think about life back in that particular moment in time, possessions and free income wasn't something that a lot of people could have had. Well,
it was a workman's sport, and that was something that darts were very proud of. It was created in the pubs and clubs of, you know, of the UK, and you know, when technology first did come round, it was like, wow, what's this? And I remember the Keith Della dart, where, do you remember the spring points? And then we had the John Law stem, where you would put the dart, you know, the flight sort of inside the stem. So technology was changing slowly, but, you know, I think dart players at that time were not ready for change that much. But yeah, you'll often see that Della where the dart would go and it would literally spring into the board. So that's my first recollection of when technology started to change.
And also the dartboards that were being played on back in them days, the staples were pretty much fixed across the board. There was wires sticking out everywhere. And anyone that watches back perhaps the old footage of the embassies back in the day would have seen all those staples around the bullseye, which at times had to be physically put back in by the referee during games.
And if you look at the averages the players were doing then, they were still averaging, you know, close to 90. And I think it was Chris Mason who did something in a sense that the size of the treble, you know, the product, you know, the size inside the dartboards. I mean, technology in relation to dartboards has come on tenfold. You know, we're going to chat about the way darts went on from the 90s and into the millennium, but dartboards is just a different one. And of course, it became a product that people wanted to see, incredible amount of 180s and 9 darters, and a lot of that is based on the, you know, the size of the trebles and also the quality to eliminate those bounce outs.
And I suppose darts, like any sport, needs to have that evolution in terms of technology. We saw it kind of similar in tennis, where for so many years the top players like John McEnroe, Tim Henman, you can call them a top player, I suppose, if you want. They were playing with wooden rackets, whereas obviously now you look at the likes of Novak Djokovic and Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz, Arina Sabalenka as well. They've got their own manufacturers. They've got their own racket to their own specification towards how stringy they want it, how stringy they don't want it. And I suppose that's similar in darts, where in the past it felt like it was a one-size-fit-all approach.
Yeah, and I think you can look at cricket, the quality of the bats, etc. You could look at, most sports there, but, there was the argument within darts as how are you going to improve, tungsten there, but, how it unfolded. And listen, I work with young players now, and we had a joke yesterday. I think my mind's gone a little bit blank about the player, but he literally brought a suitcase of darts onto the stage. And it's just unbelievable. I see so many people who are trying new darts, but I'm pretty old school. So as good as the technology of darts is, I'm still a firm believer that if you find that right dart, stick with it.
Did you find that right dart straight away?
Well, who knows? Because, I never tried other darts. Like I said, I went from the Alan Glazier dart to... I remember when I started playing properly round about 1999, so without getting into millennium, and I did a swap. A bit like a panini sticker. I seen a lad in a pub, and I got his dart, hit a 180, and all of a sudden I'm now throwing a Tony O'Shea dart. But again, going back to the original question, very similar to an Eric Bristow dart, very similarities to the Jockey Wilson dart. It wasn't, something that you'll see these days with all the pixelated darts and the colours of darts, the longer points. It was still very similar, but that was the dart I sort of chose going into the millennium, and that's when we really saw the introduction, I guess, of Peter Wright.
The introduction of Peter Wright and other such players as well. And I want to talk about the different types of darts that you can have, because it would be fair to say that years ago, as we mentioned, it was kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. Maybe barrels would be different in terms of length, but the kind of darts you'd be able to buy were all pretty much the same, weren't they? But as time moved on, there was slowly but surely a change in terms of you can buy barrels which are a bit bulkier, barrels that are a little bit more grippier.
Well, if I could go to Phil Taylor now, so I think that's a good turning point to go to him. I think the fact when he was winning games and then giving his darts to whoever was sat at the front of the audience, people started to realise that you don't need to keep a set of darts for 20 years. And Phil would bring a new set of darts out every year. The barrel, if you look at his early days of him winning Lakeside, early PDCs, he had that almost James Wade-like barrel where it's just a lot of rings going round there, so not so much, more of a different grip. And then he went to that fatter barrel. Then his biggest challenge holder was the Dennis Precies and the dum-dum of Peter Manley darts, which is, if you try to hold that, Peter Manley throws a dart only holding one finger. I mean, the way we started looking at the grip of darts. So then we sort of start to see that, as you mentioned there, the straight barrel, the long barrel, the fat barrel, the torpedo-style shaped barrels. Then we looked at the grip of the dart. Some players liked heavy grip. Some people liked it, hardly any grip in their fingers. And at the same time, then we sort of seen the introduction then of the points, which I think, obviously, we then got to mention the sort of the Simon Whitlock effect and how much the points and the Justin pipe we've got to talk about with the length of the points. So all of a sudden, sort of going into the millennium, we were looking at all different shapes and sizes of darts.
We'll talk more about points in the next segment, but I want to go back to the barrels, because manufacturers have been around for a number of years and players have been signed to manufacturers for a number of years. What do you think changed that allowed all of these to come into play? Was it the fact that the players had a little bit more power? They were signing bigger contracts with manufacturers, and as a consequence, they wanted things maybe just more suited to themselves? Yeah,
and don't forget there's an awful lot of competition out there, and you wanted your darts to look sexy. You wanted someone to look through a catalogue. You wanted someone to look on the internet. You wanted someone to go to a retail brand and say, that one stands out. And so that's when we started seeing a black barrel, a bit of red on it, a bit of blue on it, a bit of a football colour, a bit of this and a bit of that. And, all for the consumer who could look at that dart and think, I like the look of that dart. Might not have been necessarily the best for them, but they like the look of, the actual shape and colour of the dart.
And can sometimes the aesthetics of something maybe please more than actually what the end product can be?
Well, I'm old school, and I'll say the word old school in this interview for 5 or 6 times. So I believe so. Like I say, I pretty much stuck with a pretty rigid dart that I liked. But you'll see players now, look how nice this dart looks. I'm like, well, is it going into the treble 20? So I think by sort of the millennium, the whole barrel situation was just on a different level to when I started the game.
You were talking about points and how that was the next thing to kind of evolve. Because again, it was another one of those things that it felt like everything was the same. It was just 1 point, one length, nothing else really changed.
Yeah, and the length was very small in the sense that you had a bit of sandpaper, which you would be a staple part of your actual dart case, and the nothing, and then the introduction then of sort of the longer points sort of come into it. And we touched on about the barrels, about the people, the look of a dart, and the look of the points then became sort of a focal part of that. And then, of course, we've got to mention Simon Whitlock, who I think it was, didn't he crush down an Allen key to create less bounce out? And then we were in the world then where you were looking at points which had a grip on the point as well. And I touched on just before the length, maybe when Justin Pipe brought that 50 mil, 60 mil point out, and you saw the way his darts would then understack the dart as well. So all of a sudden people were creating a dart, including Phil Taylor. When you look at the sort of how small his flights would be, not only were people throwing darts, but they were having a setup where the dart would sit up the way they wanted to be. And famously, I'd go to Barney, who played Phil Taylor at the World Championships, saw the way the darts were landing in for Phil Taylor, and changed his barrel structure, changed his point structure, changed his flight in a way that he wanted his darts to understack. So, come the millennium and onto the mid part of 2005, onto 2010, we were seeing sort of totally different darts from, as we talked about in the first part of this.
Right, let's talk about how a different size point can have a different sized effect, because I suppose a lot of it depends on how a player's dart lies into the board. So say, for example, here, a Conan Whitehead, who has a very, very long point, the longest point that we have here at the Super Series. He'll do that because he's a power scorer and he likes to have a lot of room in the bed. And because his darts stand up to attention, he can do that. But then Justin Pipe was a player with a long point, but then his darts stacked into the boards.
Yeah.
How can two players whose darts enter so differently have the same point and have the same success?
Oh, I could have a dart, me and you now, where you hold the dart. So if you hold the dart at the bottom of the barrel, you'll often understack the dart. So then you're trying to complement that with a point which is longer in the bar. That's what Justin Pipe's theory was. He was using a longer point because if he threw a dart and it went just under the treble 20, he couldn't hit the bullseye because literally the flight was going down there. If you look at someone like Conan Whitehead who hold the dart further back of the dart, so then you're going to overstack the dart. So all this is part of the trial and tribute of setting up the dart that you want it to be. So you could have the same dart and me and you could throw the dart. That's when we bring the word grip into it. The way you hold the dart will determine. And the length of the points, then we get into the realms of how quick the dart is going into the dartboard as well. So all that as part of the technology suddenly started coming in and people started looking at the game differently.
And then darts are becoming more suited, and as players are signing bigger contracts, as players are becoming more professional, you talk about grip, and then we see players throwing with darts which are completely customized to the fact that they'll even have a grip point, a groove point to the finger positioning that they want to physically throw the dart with.
Yeah, it's scallops, I think is the word.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's the word that you use because you would throw a dart. That transition of throwing a dart and then going to your second dart, sometimes you'd be fiddling away trying to grab hold of the dart. But if there was a point that you could feel, because the important for elite darts, you've got to have the replication of the throw. So if you're holding the dart exactly the same each time, that's half the battle. So suddenly people were looking at technology and thinking, how can I hold the dart exactly the same each time? And like you said, we were getting grip points on certain parts of the barrel, so players knew they were holding it correctly.
How did you adapt to different darts technology as it evolved? Because obviously when you moved over to the PDC, you moved from one manufacturer to another, which meant that you had to have that adaptation. And that was at a time, again, when technology was evolving. How did you find that particular transition?
Very straightforward, but because I was playing so well. And I think at that point, Henry, I think I could have threw any dart. So I'm never the biggest believer. I mean, if Peter Wright was sat here now, it's not the fact he uses so many different darts. It's also the psychology of the mind. So when he was throwing a different dart, he felt he had to try harder because he hasn't felt this dart for a few months, years. So I think then all of a sudden, not only we talk about the size of the barrel, the point, then we look at the stem, and now we look at the sort of the all-in-one flight and stem combination, which seems to be a fear for everyone. Then it's also the psychology of throwing the dart, having the correct mindset. And listen, if you put all that in the mixing point, you're looking, that's the issues that dart players have. How do you find that right setup?
Why do you think the growth has gone into overdrive over the last 5 years or so?
Because it's a great sport to be in. And like I said, now we get collectors. People would collect various sport and memorabilia. If you're a fan of Phil Taylor, then he brings a series dart out every year. If you're a fan of Gary Anderson, exactly the same. So people have got the most incredible setups. And if Luke Littler brings a new set of darts out now, his enormous amount of fans are going to buy them. So, like I said, then it's that consumer, then it's a business. We've seen when I was first playing darts, you could get a set for 10 to 20 pounds, no problem whatsoever. You look at some of the darts, them special edition darts now with pixelated, sort of handmade, you're looking at 400, 500 pounds. So, darts just become rock and roll, and everybody started being collectors.
I know we're moving slightly away from the point a little bit. We will come back in a second, I promise. But you look at somebody like Luke Littler, who obviously is signed up to a premier manufacturer and have got so much they can do with him, obviously with the dart, with the shirts, with other such things, that actually manufacturers now can build a whole brand around a player, almost similar to, like, say you're Manchester United or you're Manchester City and you've got a club shop. You can get a Manchester United shirt at a club shop, can't you? You can get Manchester United training kits, Manchester United boots, footballs, all the rest of it. Manufacturers could do exactly the same with players now, can't they?
Absolutely. It's a business. Like I said, it's the second most watched sport. We know we've just finished the World Championships as well, and people want to be a part of it. So, the original evolution of the dart was, it started off as that was by your side all time. Yeah, it looks okay to me. To these days now, where young players want the best colour, the longest points, the best looking setup. Certain brands on them, whether it's almost like wearing a pair of trainers. You get laughed at if you throw a Glen Durham dart, because everyone wants to throw a Joe Cullen dart because it looks absolutely fantastic. So, the change has sort of been absolutely incredible. But I stand by the fact that it's about you. You find that right setup is what I would say to anybody. Yes, technology is there now. Just try and test a few things, but stick with it, because when things don't go right and you start thinking that a new dart is the answer, for me it's not. It's like a little bit of sugar. It's like a short-term hit. So I would say to anybody, there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of dart setups out there. Find what suits you, by practicing and looking, and then stick with that set. Get rid of those rest of the sets. Unless you're a collector, leave them in the box, whatever you need to do there. Find that setup and stick with it.
Okay, say there's parents watching this and their kids want to get involved in the sport, and they're looking at the market and they're looking for darts to buy, and the parents are going to buy the darts for the kids, the dartboard for the kids, and things like that. What would be your recommendation in terms of possibly price range, the types of darts they should look at, and the types of other equipment they should look at, and what options are there now compared to the past? I
think my answer is slightly different in a sense that I would get myself to a local academy, because there's so many academies now which are offering a service of throwing darts. So you can have the fat barrel, small barrel, long point, short point, all in one flight stem combination, fat flight, pair flight, kite flight, and try and test until you get a set that feels really good. I wouldn't go into that minefield of opening, looking at the internet and going on a certain page and paying 200 quid for a set of darts that the young man, young girl can't throw. So get out there, do so. There's a lot of shops now which are offering a service to tungsten test, and that's what I would recommend.
And is that the important thing, just getting it right? Because as we mentioned, there's a lot of sets out there that which are cheap for a lot of families, maybe from a working class background. So if you're going to invest, you have to invest correctly. So actually these services are probably important, because say, for example, it doesn't quite work and they've just bought a packet off the internet, they probably can't afford another one. And there could be a player with talent that's got completely the wrong setup and we lose them as a consequence.
Yeah, like I said, there's also that, like, wow, you've just got the latest little darts. Wow, that's incredible. A bit like, look at the trainers you're wearing when you were at school type thing. It's a bit like that. And I would say to any parent, forget that. Your young sibling might find a set of darts which will be the cheapest on the market, but they suit their style of throwing. But my answer to that question is go to somewhere where they offer a service, where it's tungsten testing, and the best place to do that is the academies, because they're bursting at the moment. I mean, there's so many young players that want to play darts right now, and before you invest heavily, do some testing.
Oh, to be young with what's on offer, right?
Yeah, like I said, it's a different game. I'm glad we've had this chat about it, because it's not the game I started in 1985. It's totally different. One set of darts I think I used for the first 15 years of my life. It's not the same no more. These players coming through have a set of darts now for 15 days. So, and a lot of that started when Phil Taylor started giving those darts after each game, that realisation that you don't need that one set of darts. And you'll see players now, the Stephen Buntons of this world, they're using a set of darts per week because they want the grip to have that new feel. So, it's up to you to get on that practice board. It's up to you to find that setup. There's plenty of choice out there, but don't rush into getting different setups when your form dips.
The Glen darts still available at all good car boots?
Absolutely. Well, it didn't take long, did it, for him to start picking on me already? But yeah, nice and standard, very much like the Eric Bristow, Jockey Wilson style, but so much modern stuff out there.
Glenn, pleasure as ever. Thank you very much for watching along to the latest edition of the Tungsten Talk here on Pluto TV.